So our idea is to help companies move away from paper entirely. And I think in terms of this is happening on multiple fronts. We are doing it as a company, helping other companies, but we're being also pushed by international institutions. So whether it's EU looking to essentially move to digital trade documents, it's the same with Singapore. All the other major kind of players in the logistics world are kind of moving towards that. Our idea is to essentially accommodate the document, or accommodate the user in terms of documents that are necessary. So for example, if we are missing a document, let's say we are onboarding you and you come to me and you say, look, Chris, this is very good, but I am missing a certificate of origin, for example. So the way it would work is I would say, okay, no problems at all. You would just send me a template. So essentially an empty document that I can use as a reference. And then we reconstruct it in our system. And essentially then you're able to, move your entire process to eTEU. The long-term vision of it is to essentially, through API connections and such, is to automate the process, to go as far as to say, if it doesn't matter if you've done it in your system, but you just want to use the Web3, ownership transfer capabilities of eTEU, or you want to use documents generated in eTEU for customs, for your own software, for archive, for whatever, you can use that. One of the ways on how to do it is structured data. It's very simple, actually, yeah.
So where are the documents actually stored? Like, they're not stored in the eTEU software itself, is it? Or is it stored somewhere else on chain?
So the documents themselves are stored on the server, right? So it's all encrypted. We're following the latest, cybersecurity standards in terms of encryption, in terms of key access, management of users in general. What we aim to do is essentially it's the access to the documents and the transactions that are being stored on chain, right? So it's to make sure that there's an immutable audit trail, so you know exactly who sent it, who generated it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And when I say who, right, there's a lot of assumption even now, I think in the industry, is when we say, it's a public ledger, that the companies kind of assume that everyone will be able to see the data, but that's not true, right? We're just essentially, what you are able to see on chain is the transaction history to a certain extent.
It does. Thank you so much, man. This has been such a blessing to have you guys here and chat with you, learn about the company and learn about yourselves as well. I don't have any other questions, but I would definitely love to do this again. You guys are you're easy to talk to. It's such a relaxed environment. I'm thankful for the opportunity to been able to be here with you both and chat with you guys.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for inviting.
No problem, man. And again, I appreciate that Spider-Man outfits. Edward, I was hoping you'd have something as well.
We'll get him for next time.
Yeah, next time.
I think just to close it off, and this is a flex that I'm going to use very arrogantly, is that a lot of people in this industry are quite a bit older than us. We always kind of push and promote ourselves as the young professionals, because all of our team is below the age of 30, and yet we're here. We're going through these legal processes. We're talking to the very professional people on the same level in terms of knowledge as they are. And I don't know, I don't want to sound arrogant, but it's always a point of pride, I suppose, to position ourselves as, yes, we don't have 20 years of experience in the industry, but within 5 years we've managed to achieve something that a lot of people, for a lot of people takes a lot of time.
We making moves. We making major moves. We making moves. We making major moves. We going all in like we got nothing to lose. We making moves. We making major moves.
Hey, good evening. How you doing?
Yeah, good. I have a surprise for you.
Oh, that's sweet, yo. That's sick.
So now we're fitting into the context of your stream or video or.
No doubt. So is Valentin coming?
So Valentin, unfortunately, he just messaged us. He's unfortunately not coming because he has some private stuff to attend to, health-wise. But there's the two of us. Hopefully, we'll be able to cover enough ground without Valentin.
I've seen some of you, both of you guys' interviews, and I think you guys will be able to manage without him for today.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Just as of I don't know, like first of all, I think it's fair enough to introduce ourselves.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
And then I have a question as well. How do we refer to you? Is it Mr. Man?
Yeah, that's what I go by. I go by Mr. Man. Outside of the costume, there's a whole other personality, and I live my life. Actually, to be completely honest with you, my personality with the mask and without is pretty similar. It's just, yeah.
Okay.
I have a hard time not being myself.
Are you more of a Peter Parker or Miles Morales guy?
I want to say a good combination of both of them. I want to say I have Peter Parker's morals and his ethics. Miles Morales, I have his young heart.
Young heart, yeah, and the drive for action.
Yeah.
All
That's
right.
sweet. You have the costume there, though. So, as I was telling, I think Edward, is that you I was chatting with, or who am I chatting with?
No, you were talking to me.
That's you. Okay.
Was first, yeah.
Okay, so the way I want to operate this interview, I guess you would call it, is not like an interview. Like I don't want it to just be a question and answer thing. Like I want it to be more of a free flow. We have like a conversation. You know, I do have questions here, and I can tie them into the conversation itself. That way, it seems more holistic as opposed to, well, here's eTEU, here's Mr. Man, question answer, back and forth. It's kind of dry, you know. So that's my strategy. I like the raw. People get the opportunity to learn who you both are, why you've decided to go down this path. They recognize who I am, and I like this raw, you know, conversation style with people as opposed to here's the questions A, B, C, D. You know, like I don't like that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think you know, just having a conversation is always more genuine. It's just more fun, and I think it's more interesting than just you know, you ask us a question, then we'll give you an answer. But I think sometimes, like, you know, it's good to ask questions to steer the conversation, right?
For sure.
But in general, like, we're open to just having a discussion. I think just for context, I know you do write like a lot about, like, let's say XRP and XDC kind of elements. I will be, you know, 100% honest with you. I don't think from our side we can offer a lot of insight into, let's say, specific, you know, XRP elements.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but it's just kind of like our focus is more on, you know, supply chain, trade finance, how blockchain and trade documents in general kind of affected regulation around it. I think what would be interesting is to talk about ETDA, so Electronic Trade Documents Act. So it's a policy in the UK that was accepted. And Edward was part of the commission that worked on it. So
were you really? I followed that thing since its inception, right until the signing of it in September 2023. So my intent isn't to talk about XRP or even blockchain. Like I want to learn about you guys, learn about the company and how the company operates. I went to school for aviation management, 3-year advanced program. And from there, I could go work at the airport, the airline. I could do cargo shipment with aircraft too. So I have a lot of questions surrounding that, and I want to tie it into blockchain because that's the underlying infrastructure itself.
Yeah, that sounds good. So just in general, so I'm Chris. So on Twitter, I lead our Twitter efforts. So most likely, if you've interacted with us, that was me. I am head of product. I'm one of the co-founders as well, but you know, I work with our dev team. I'm kind of like on the product side of things. Naturally, because we're still a small team, I do a bit of everything, but so does every member of our team. And Edward is our, you know, he's our chief executive officer, right?
So if I can just, I guess, further that what you were saying there, you said chief executive. When I had watched an interview back in 2019 with the three of you guys, it seemed like a professor or somebody you were talking to, and you said you were the co-founder. Is there another individual who founded eTEU with you?
There's me, Edward, Valentine, who couldn't come, and there's also Mike. Mike is so Mike is he's very sociable, I think, but in general, like, he's how would you say, he's a business development guy, but we hold him off for like interactions with like Eastern Europe, you know, because that's where he fits really, really well in terms of the communication style. So, when it comes to, let's say, talking in English a lot more, or, driving that conversation in English, sometimes, he handles it well, but, like sometimes,
it's not a strong
Well,
point.
pretty much,
I guess.
yeah.
Yeah. So, Edward, can you-
subdivided those two things. I would say Valentine kind of handles partnerships in general, like how to say corporate business development with larger companies, and Mike, he mostly focuses on like direct sales to logistics firms, commodity traders, etc. So stuff like that.
Okay. So I guess, Edward, can you tell me about yourself? I heard a bit about Christian. Can you tell me a bit about yourself, who you are? And then afterwards, like the question to either of you guys, like what got you into this industry, into this field itself, EBL specifically?
Sure. So I would say background-wise, I think what kind of unites us, both myself, Chris, Valentine, Mike, we all come from families which were involved in the logistics industry for a number of generations. Myself personally, I'm originally from Ukraine, and my family was involved in the freight forwarding business for the last 3 generations. So I have seen kind of from early age how this industry operates, and kind of inefficiencies within the industry, reliance on paper, reliance on legacy tech. Education-wise, I studied in England. I studied computer science and IT project management at UCL, worked in software development, and kind of had this idea of combining those two experiences, both like IT and more of a legacy business experience from the family background. And that's kind of how we initially started out with eTEU. So the company itself was initially founded as a, let's say, more of a software development firm for the logistics industry. We worked for a couple of years together with the guys, and have seen this niche which wasn't really covered by any of the existing, let's say, software providers of electronic bill of lading, and this huge reliance on paper documents. And yeah, decided to kind of go into this industry to give like a brief background.
All right, that's a nice background. Well, who are you, Edward? If you don't mind me asking, who are you?
Well, that's a bit of a philosophical question, even.
I guess to simplify it, like I guess I'd also like to learn a bit about some of you guys' hobbies itself. Like who are you? What do you do outside of this company, this structure? Like who are you?
Well, generally, to be honest, the company generally consumes quite a significant portion of time. Unlike Chris, I don't do martial arts to my how to say being a bit sorry for this, but to be honest, I don't know, I love reading outside of work. I love history. That's to be honest, as much as I can answer this.
Edward is a massive bookworm. He had a very big streak. I remember, when we started this company, it would be like a book a week or something like this. Like every time we would meet, it would be like Edward would come up and he would say, "Oh, I've read this in this book I'm reading," right? And it's like every week there's like a new book. So Edward is definitely into literature, and just very active in general. It's a bit of a shame that Valentine couldn't come. Valentine is a huge Roman Empire nerd.
Is it really? Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
So
I'm just brushing up on my history, actually. I've learned a lot about history itself since I've started, I guess, my journey into blockchain. It had taken me down avenues I didn't even know existed in terms of money itself, in terms of cryptography, in terms of the different avenues in life, essentially itself.
Yeah.
But I guess so. How long has eTEU been alive? Been something even before it became a physical construct? How long have you guys been like creating this in your head before you decide to execute on it?
So we started I think this was in 2018. We were all university students and we joined a hackathon. So this is actually how we all met, because Edward, he was studying at UCL at the time and I was doing my undergrad at City. So I was studying international political economy, but I don't know, like, I guess for my background, I come from Estonia, and in Estonia, we have a very big focus on entrepreneurship and like digital things in general, right? So I was always kind of interested in hackathons and entrepreneurship and things like that. So in 2018, we joined a hackathon, and Edward with Mike and Valentine, they came as, people with an idea. And I joined the hackathon as essentially someone looking to join a team. And because my background, well, my personal background is less associated with, or was less associated with logistics prior to eTEU. But yeah, my father, my brother, they were also tied to supply chain, fertilizer market in Estonia, and all these kinds of things. So I found the idea to be very exciting, very cool. And we joined and we started working on it. And we actually won that one. So I think it was called Kickstart London 2018 or something like this, right?
Okay.
And back then, yeah, it was more focused on, let's say, providing service or providing like software, but also more focused on freight forwarding, right? So helping companies organize and digitize their kind of organization processes in terms of supply chain, rather than bills of lading as such. I think after that, we, some of us graduated, some of us carried on studying, but we never really stopped working on it, and we kept iterating and talking to clients. And we quickly came to realize that, okay, the freight forwarding market in terms of digitization is, it's not saturated as such, but there's a lot of ideas and companies kind of getting into space, right? It was no longer really a blue ocean, to speak in the business terms, right? And we thought, okay, how can we differentiate ourselves? So what we did is we essentially took the love for technology, and blockchain back then was something very, very new, right? And we decided to put them both together. So then it moved into, let's say, freight forwarding with attached to blockchain. And then we moved past that to digitizing documents tied to supply chain. And naturally, bill of lading came up as one of the main documents, right? And in terms of history, I think the first bill of lading was made in, again, like by Romans, right? Because back then there was a lot of trade going on, and you still needed to essentially provide proof of ownership and what are you shipping? And in a general sense, this document hasn't changed in literally 2,000 years, right? Or maybe probably a bit less, but I'm exaggerating. But in a very long time, the structure of documents pretty much the same. And up until very recently, these documents were still shipped by courier and done by post, on paper by post. And we thought that, okay, so we can really disrupt this market, and we decided to engage with it. And so at the beginning, we focused on document generation, so help companies move away from, because even back then it was something like Excel or internal services that would generate these documents, even Word. Like we've seen some, I remember when we started, we've seen some crazy software, crazy like legacy tech, like code bases that haven't been updated for like 15 years, and at this point the companies are struggling with updating them because it's so ingrained into their services and processes. At this point, it's very difficult to move on. And once we kind of started moving with the bill of lading, we managed to capture Ocean Network Express to deliver a pilot where we essentially, we have this framework which we call shadow shipments. And the shadow shipment it's an additional digital layer on top of the original shipment. So if a company, and back then, again, very new, the shipping line was a little bit skeptical, a bit afraid of using electronic bills of lading. So they said, we'll do everything how we've done before, but in addition, we'll test out your software and see and kind of compare and see, what are the benefits.
So is that what the MLETR is essentially what you're referring to? Like electronic transferable record, the shadow shipping, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, so specifically what Chris was referring to is the pilot that we've done with ONE, the shipping line, where we pretty much mapped in parallel how their existing process works with a paper document, and in parallel with a real-world transaction, we performed the transaction leveraging the electronic bill of lading on our platform, which kind of allowed to compare side by side the pretty much the potential cost and time savings for using the electronic bill of lading.
Cool. Okay, that makes sense. That's neat. That would have been like sweet to watch. And I get to read about them, but to actually watch these things, I think would be interesting. So you're using the EBL, so the electronic bill of lading, for your software, your interface now. So how does that actually work? You have the interface in front of you, you type in, fill out what you need to fill out, get to the end, and you click send. Is there a messaging service that lets the end user or beneficiary know that they're supposed to receive something, or is there a smart contract? What is triggered in between that action of send and the other beneficiary receiving whatever that is?
So there is, the way we've structured it is to essentially, I'm going to take the long route on this one, okay? If that's okay with you.
Yeah.
There is a industry regulator called IGP&I Club. So they're essentially a group of insurers, right? And they approve the electronic bill of lading services. So essentially, without their approval, you cannot issue legal bills of lading. So we got that license in 2023. So we're one of 9-10 companies in the world that has the license. But essentially, the reason why I'm explaining this is that the goal was to essentially emulate the process, how it's done physically, so on paper, but in a digital alternative, right? So to answer that question specifically, essentially what happens is there's two ways to go about it. So one of them is to essentially fill in a form, which is a template of the bill of lading, and then essentially create something called a shipping instruction. So essentially a draft of the bill of lading. That would be passed to the carrier, and the carrier is the party that issues legally the bill of lading, right? So once they have the draft in their hands, what they would do is essentially they would mint it as an NFT. And the reason why this is very important is that even on paper, the bill of lading, because it carries with it the right of ownership to the cargo itself, we're dealing with original documents. So whoever has the original document essentially owns the cargo itself. And so the NFT technology as such, right, because it's it's one and only document, it essentially emulates the printing of the bill of lading. And even when it comes to printing, right, they're not printing on just regular paper, but they have this, it's like watermarked paper, right? So essentially, whenever that is released, they can confirm that it's legit, essentially, by looking at the material that the paper is using and the watermarks on it. So to copy that, essentially, we would have watermarks on our documents, but also kind of like the NFT technology to verify that it is the original version of it. So once we have minted the NFT, oh, sorry, just to wrap up the loop, and then I'm talking a lot. Just to kind of wrap it up, essentially, once the NFT is minted, the users are then passing it, so essentially transferring the NFT around, right? Or rather, access to the NFT as such. So essentially, it's passing on the right of ownership to the bill of lading and thus the cargo itself.
So for the end result, then, for me to go to the shipping company, I have the NFT on my phone because I drafted the bill of lading, gone to the intermediary company, shipping company. Is it now I have this NFT, did they scan this and then it leaves the information leaves my phone and they now enter it, or my point of entry and they receive it? Or is it I still have a copy, like a receipt for my records as well?
Yeah, pretty much the bill of lading itself, it's issued by either a shipping or a logistics company, depending on the type of the bill of lading. So they issue it via their pretty much account on the platform, and then they transfer it between the let's say members of the chain. So I would say there are kind of two layers to the solution. There is a technological layer, which kind of, as Chris explained, replicates how the process would work with the paper document. So with the paper, the bill of lading would be issued to the shipper, so let's say exporter, in the local office of the shipping company and handed over to them as a piece of paper. In our case, it's issued within our platform and handed over to them within the platform in the electronic format. And we kind of replicate uniqueness of paper using the NFT technology, kind of issuing it as a digital object on chain, so replacing a piece of paper with a digital object. And I think to add on to this, I think my most favorite question when I explain regarding the electronic bills of lading to someone outside of logistics, my favorite question is like, why can't you just send the PDF? by the
Yeah, yeah.
blockchain here.
Hmm.
So that's pretty much why, because you need to replicate the uniqueness of this document in the digital world, and with PDF, however many times you send it between the parties, pretty much you would have the kind of double spending dilemma, which blockchain is created to solve. And in a way, bills of lading are similar to money, actually. So you cannot really send dollars via email, and in a similar manner, you cannot send bills of lading via email. Then comes the question, why can't you send it similar to money via the banking system? And the first actual attempt to digitize bills of lading was actually done by SWIFT, the same network which is used by banks for the international wire transfers. However, it kind of inherited all of the drawbacks of international wire transfers as well. And as a person kind of interested in the XRP, I think you know quite a lot about the issues when it's international kind of money transfers, etc. So this was one of the reasons which kind of hindered the adoption of electronic bill of lading as well. But yeah, we can discuss this then in more detail. That's kind of to just add on top of what Chris said.
Okay, so in terms of emulating the movement of the bill of lading itself, what about the life cycle? How does that work for digital, I guess? Because I mean, with bill of lading, I don't know the exact time frame you have to hold on to something until it becomes, I can let this go now, throw it out, or whatever it is. How does the life cycle emulate that of the bill of lading itself, like the actual physical copy?
Sure. So I think it's the easiest to comprehend it when you explain it on the specific process. So I would say, let's imagine there is a grain exporter in Poland which is selling his grain to his buyer in China. So when he comes the time for him to send the grain to his buyer in China, the exporter in Poland would come to the shipping company at the port of destination, hand over the cargo to them to load into the container, let's say, and the shipping company instead would give him the bill of lading in exchange. In our case, both the exporter and the shipping company will be onboarded on the platform, and the shipping company would issue it to the exporter as a digital document within the platform. Then this grain would be traveling to the port of destination for, let's say, 30 days, which would take for the ship to come from Poland to China. And during this time, the exporter would hold on onto his bill of lading, which from the legal perspective means that despite the fact that the grain is physically in the possession of the shipping company, but the legal owner is actually the exporter sitting in Poland. Usually, buyers of products don't want to pay before they come to the, let's say, port of destination. So the buyer in China would only pay the exporter in Poland when he receives the grain in the port of destination. Or there might be certain kind of legal agreements that are like different in the terms, etc., cash against documents, letters of credit, etc. But that's kind of getting into more complicated stuff. When in 30 days, ship comes to the port of destination in China, the buyer in China and the seller in Poland would pretty much perform a kind of swap. Sometimes it's done on trust, where one of them would first send money and another one would send the document via the courier post. Sometimes it's done using trusted intermediaries such as banks, where the buyer of grain in China would send money to a bank, and the buyer of grain would, and the seller of grain would send the bill of lading to a bank. A bank would pretty much perform kind of a swap. That's what's called letter of credit transaction. But in a nutshell, in the traditional bill of lading would be sent by post to the buyer in China, so they can present it to the shipping company, called surrendering the bill of lading. And the shipping company would look at the bill of lading, verify that it's original, and say, okay, you are the legal owner of this grain. I will hand it over to you at the port of destination. And similarly with our solution, the buyer in China would present the bill of lading within our application, our platform, and the shipping company would accept the surrender and hand over the cargo in the port of destination using the platform pretty much digitally.
I think
Go ahead.
The only thing I would add is, perhaps for clarification, there is a process called surrendering, So when a consignee, so the importer, right, they, in order to receive the cargo, what they do is they essentially surrender the document. So they essentially pass the bill of lading, the original copy, to the carrier for them to verify that it's the legit version, right? It's the original. So I think in terms of like life cycle, again, it depends, right? Edward mentioned, let's say, long-term or long-distance shipping, let's say from Poland to China. But it can, honestly, it can happen in a day as well, right? Like when we're talking about feeder lines, so something going from Estonia to Finland or from France to the UK, often enough, this happens in 1-2 days. And what happens there, why digitization is very important, especially in the feeder line situation, is that in some cases, what can happen is that the cargo arrives, but the documents are delayed because the post service are not fast enough to deliver the documents, right? So, yeah.
I recall watching an interview where I believe it was you, Edward, saying that there's a cost savings of up to 70%, I believe. I don't remember what the actual figure was, but 70% itself that you guys were looking to achieve in terms of cost saving for this particular setup here. Have you guys achieved that, or are you on your way to achieving that, or was that an industry standard you're looking to achieve?
Pretty much in terms of, let's say, savings on document processing during the shipment and document courier costs, I think it's even higher at the moment. So in the transactions that we did, we usually reduce the documentation processing spent from $100 plus per consignment to somewhere around $10 per consignment. So it is quite significant, and I think there is even bigger potential in kind of applications which can be developed on top of just documentation, and that's where we're moving at the moment. So kind of when we launched to the market after finally getting the IGPNI approval, we have realized that kind of by creating a solution which replaces this paper document, we're not just replacing the, let's say, courier post. We're actually creating a new asset class, which was previously kind of unavailable to those shippers. So goods which value of which was pretty much locked in sea for most exporters, they're now easily available to be kind of leveraged for financing, etc. So that's where we are moving at the moment, to provide this value to exporters by allowing them to pledge their in-transit cargo as collateral easily using our electronic bill of lading.
All right, check you guys out, man. That's sweet.
I think also one thing to consider here is, in addition to just the courier services, right? It's sending the documents physically. It's the manual labor that goes into handling these documents as well. So when we talk about processing, is okay, how do you gather all this information? How do you access it? How do you put it into the document itself? How do you then, do you print it? Do you send it? Does someone pick it up, et cetera, et cetera? What happens if there's a mistake? God forbid, right? Let's say if there's a mistake in a document, essentially you have to restart the entire process. So, and again, coming back to, for example, feeder lines, like this process can be somewhat forgiving if, you have 30 days, okay, the documents arrived, you still have a couple days to go. When we talk about feeder lines, is, the documents arrived, I look at them, and there's a mistake in them. So what do? I have to essentially send the documents back or request for them to be destroyed and then issue new ones, and then I have to wait for the new documents to arrive. But that then comes additional costs of, the cargo arrives, the ship needs to leave. It can't stand in the port forever, right? It's probably the same with airplanes, right? Like once an airplane lands, it probably needs to be, cargo needs to be taken out of it, it needs to be loaded and then shipped off. Same with ships. But then the question is, okay, so then we have to take the cargo, place it in the warehouse or like in the port somewhere. Who pays for it, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of additional costs that come on top of just the document delay costs.
All right. Well, that answers several questions I was looking to go down. So I appreciate that answer. I guess with that being said, where you guys are now and what you're doing, were you guys early in this space? And if so, how early are you? Like I remember hearing of like one other company doing something similar, but it's also not as similar. Have you heard of Wave BL? Yeah, so you guys offer a bit more, I want to say, encompassing software interface for the user itself. So like, how early were you guys into this space?
So I think on the electronic bill of lading specifically, we started working around 2020 to say like actually diving into this product specifically. So we have been working on this for a couple of years already. This industry itself is very highly regulated. So in order for the shipping company to be able to issue the bill of lading in the electronic format, they can only do this with a solution which is approved by the IGPNI. And IGPNI is an international group of PNI clubs. That's a global insurance. They're called cooperative, but to be honest, it's a bit of like a cartel. It's kind of a association of the cargo or shipping insurance companies who cover over 90% of seagoing cargo. So pretty much anything that is not sanctioned and travels by the sea is insured by this single organization. And they have a list of recognized electronic bill of lading providers, which they say would be globally honored in the same way as paper. Otherwise, if the shipping company issues the bill of lading which is not recognized by the IGPNI, this compromises their insurance. And pretty much no kind of non-IGPNI approved electronic bill of lading providers won't be able to actually get that real headwinds in the market, because shipping companies risk compromising their insurance if they use them, and they wouldn't really allow this. And this was the initial brick wall kind of that we hit when we wanted to kind of go into this market. We've realized there is a significant regulatory challenge. So we spent 2.5 years going through the approval process with an IGPNI. And I would say this is the most bureaucratic organization you would ever encounter in your life. I thought this was the government, but they're not even close, because this is an association which unites representatives from around the world. So kind of representatives of all of their local branches have to kind of assemble, go through your solution, go through your legal basis of your solution, then submit their requests for changes, what they're not happy with, etc. And then you have to change it. And this like pretty much took us 2.5 years of the legal and technical due diligence with them in order to get approved by them. And we've achieved this approval at the very end of 2023, like pretty much before Christmas. I think it was like 22nd.
It was like 23rd of December. Yeah.
Yeah, and we've been able to kind of launch the solution to the actual market, to the actual use only last year. But this took us 2.5 years of kind of hard work, both on the development and the legal side, in order to be able to do this.
When it comes down to anything legal, like when I think about it realistically, anything legal is it's a sham. I mean, we got to play within the construct that's put before us here. We just have to recognize that it is that construct, unfortunately. And like, I totally understand that, again, coming from the aviation world, it's a heavily regulated industry, and anything that you do outside of what you state you do in the SOPs, the standard operating procedures, you can now be scrutinized for, why did you do this? How did this happen? When did this happen? Why did you choose to deviate? Like, it's just, and I understand why, in terms of safety and efficacy and performance and whatever else you're trying to achieve. But I also understand that like we have to play within that construct, or else you're not welcomed within the construct. Unfortunately, like I totally get that.
I think it's like, the problem I found with it is, especially like on the product side of things. Like the example I love to bring up, I remember so whenever you send a bill of lading on our platform, there's essentially, you can either accept the transaction or you can reject it, right? That's what we called it, reject. And I remember 20 minutes on one call, right? So, and bear in mind, this is like, we had like an hour and a half meetings, like once a month, maybe if we're lucky, right? So 20 minutes we're spending discussing whether reject is the right word. Because when you send a bill of lading by post, you cannot reject it. You can't tell the postman, no, I will not accept it. What you would do is you would get the paper and then you would transfer it back. So they said that reject is an incorrect term, so we have to change it to transfer back, essentially, right? Because you're kind of touching the document. So there's a lot of like things like that. And I think the problem with it is it's often the case, the same with like public sector, that the private and just economies and whatever are developing, and technology, right, is the correct term, is developing so fast that the public sector, and regulatory institutions in general are having trouble kind of catching up. And it also, to a certain extent, when it comes to legal elements, a lot of these people they're very coherent 100% on the legal side of things. But when it comes to technology, right, the knowledge is kind of lacking. And so you have to explain how you're fitting into the already existing frameworks with something entirely new, right? Yeah, and that's very tough, right? Aviation or sea or whatever. Yeah.
I recall watching this video about a year ago, and this individual was talking, and he's like, eventually we're going to reach a point where technology just goes up, and it goes up, and regulations will not be able to keep up with it. And that's where that's where we are. We've been for the past couple of years, and now regulations are just coming into place to unlock certain use cases for specific things. Like I saw that you guys started off in the UK first, I believe it was, and now you're operating in Europe because of the whole Brexit situation. Is that correct? And I believe that you were trying to get into Ukraine as well, but there's a lot of geopolitical stuff taking place over there as well. Where is that at? Like, again, this construct determines what we can and can't do. So I'm just curious to find out where you're at.
I think in terms of the regulation and generally by the nature of international trade, it's international. So in this sense, we're not really bound to one specific geography. Legal-wise, as a platform, the underlying legal system of our solution is UK law. Because of the introduction of ETDA in the UK, we can kind of leverage it. And in a similar way as UK or English law is the correct term, is leveraged in the international business dealings, we pretty much leverage it in the electronic bill of lading dealings. So the same way as, for example, an Argentinian company and American company can be bound by the English law and sign the contract within the English jurisdiction. People who use our platform, whether they're in Ukraine or they're in China or they're in any other country, they're bound by English law, by the terms and conditions of our platform, and they're subject to English law, which now recognizes electronic trade documents as equivalent of paper.
All right. Go ahead.
No, it's just that when you mentioned Brexit, I think Brexit only added extra layers to it, because the idea with Brexit was essentially that we're going to get rid of bureaucracy and simplify processes, but actually reverse happened. If you remember when it just happened, right? Like there were massive queues in the La Manche, like the channel between France and the UK. And you had the logistics were stopped because now you had to file additional documents. There's like a lot of problems that came with it. And when it comes to, again, like regulations in terms of geography as well, it's not only, let's say like war in Ukraine naturally affects like international trade in general. And when it comes to Ukraine is a massive producer of grain, for example, right? But even like smaller precedents like Brexit, they set a precedent, right? It's like essentially when you think about the US, Mexico, and Canada, like they have NAFTA, right? But then when it came to signing a similar agreement with Europe, there were a lot of disagreements. And so a lot of these agreements and then kind of like conventions that you join, they might simplify processes or they might actually make them complex. It's very difficult to find, the middle ground between this makes sense and this makes sense, but it also makes it a lot more complicated.
So I guess if you guys are looking to, say, come into somewhere like Canada and US, right now there's a lot of things happening right now, things being like shaking up in the world. And one of the things Trump is talking about is tariffs. Like, how does the eTEU allow for such a thing like that? I mean, that's just such a dynamic thing. Like how does it allow for that to now be incorporated into the platform, or is that built into it itself? I imagine it would be, no?
I mean, it's kind of built into the idea, right? Like implementing tariffs does not necessarily stop the trade. Like there's still going to be trade going on between US and whichever country they apply tariffs to. It might change in terms of volumes, but the processes themselves, I would assume, remain more or less the same. Like you still need the bills of lading. You still need to go through all the bureaucratic steps, except now, with tariffs, it more plays on the price, I suppose, than the actual legal process of it.
Okay.
I would actually add a bit regarding the tariff stakes. Sorry for interrupting you. Just kind of quickly follow up on the Chris's Chris's comment and Chris's statement, that I think kind of efficiency in terms of trade operations becomes more kind of important when tariffs are introduced, because the profit margins either shrink or you have to charge more to your consumers, which naturally decreases demand. So by optimizing the efficiency of those trade transactions, you can actually kind of decrease the effect of tariffs on the potential kind of trade transactions and make them more efficient. So in my opinion, this actually makes optimization of documentation processes and any other supply chain management processes even more kind of important and topical when tariffs are introduced.
So you said it streamlines the process if and when tariffs are introduced. How what is the what I don't need you to go into extreme detail, but what is like how would a fee structure work then for the company if the reduction of say electronic bill of lading begin to exist at this point now? Like say we're going through something like we're currently going through now, or back in 2020, 2021, when the shipping, the supply chain began to break down at this point here. California had a bunch of um, cargo shipments just sitting at the port. The ships were not able to leave port. How does that, like, I'm aware that affects you guys. So how can you structure or tier your use of the platform, if that makes sense what I'm asking?
I think the point, and Edward, correct me if I'm wrong, it's not necessarily that the tariffs streamline the process, is that you have to pay more attention to essentially the risk of human error, right? So with tariffs and all these things, because the the margin of the profit margins are shifting, right? The country that the tariffs are applied to might have to pay more, et cetera, right? So there's a lot of price elements that are in place. There's less room to make mistakes. So it's not necessarily that it streamlines in a sense that it makes the process more efficient, but rather that you have to pay more attention to efficiency. And I think when, for example, 2020, when COVID started, right? And the way COVID affected supply chain was exactly that, right? There's no workers at the port who can essentially accept the cargo. But there was another element to it as well, was, if I remember correctly, the price of containers skyrocketed. And the problem was also that a lot of these containers were stuck in China. So, you know, there's an element, I think, I think the answer to this question, it goes beyond ourselves, just eTEU as a company and like bill of lading. The question is in the, how do we solve this in the industry, where a lot of containers that come from China into Europe or into US are loaded with goods, but they leave empty, you know? And then what if there's a situation like COVID where the empty containers are stuck in China and now we cannot access them? And I think tariffs kind of play on the same element, but from a different perspective. If I think with COVID, it was the issues with labor, like actual physical people being in ports and doing all this work, or physical containers missing, or not missing, but there's not enough of them. Then here it's more on, you know, like the economic scale where that affects it. And I think the way for us specifically to counter it or to work within that framework is to offer exactly that, is to help companies increase their efficiency. It's to avoid human errors. It's to essentially, because the profit margins are in danger already, how can we help companies, you know, protect their profits in that sense? Gotcha.
So is everybody in the supply chain expected to hold or utilize the eTEU software, or is eTEU interoperable? You guys create a bill of lading on your software and then you send that off. Now, does the next person need to have that eTEU, or is there something else they can use, or how does that look?
It's a phenomenal question. Edward, you can take this one.
Sure. So we are moving, let's say, towards interoperability. We have integrated with Trade Trust. This is a platform created by the Singapore government, which now allows for any other solution connected to Trade Trust, which is a number of other electronic bill of lading providers, number of other government institutions, and other technological solutions. So any electronic bill of lading issued in our platform is now interoperable with anything that's connected to trade trust. And the same way, any other document issued on those platforms can now be easily accepted by our solution as well. So we are moving to interoperability with this. And we're also working with DCSA. This is an association for kind of digitalization of trade, which was set up by 9 out of 10 biggest container carriers in the world. And we're working on the interoperability initiative together with them to pretty much enable for all electronic bills of lading to be interoperable. And I think it's already public, this initiative, the EBL interoperability project by DCSA, which would pretty much mean that any IGPNI approved EBL would be interoperable between each other. So yeah.
All right. And I guess one of the things I had seen on your webpage too, while I was scrolling through it there, it says onboarding takes 5 minutes. I'm very curious how it takes 5 minutes. And I mean, I don't doubt that by any means. I know I've recently gone and done some onboarding with a few apps, and I had like training sessions, and I had to scan all my old documents for my real estate to get the ownership on there and everything. So I'm just curious how the 5 minutes works for onboarding. Like, what does that actually look like?
So the onboarding is very, very simple. The way we do it is essentially you would register, and then you would you would connect a wallet, right? So there's two approaches that we are kind of working on. One is essentially to use a MetaMask, right? So it's just an extension. So essentially it takes 5 minutes if you already have a MetaMask, right? But then again, registering a MetaMask, to be honest, is a very straightforward process. What we're aiming to do is increase the efficiency so far as to say that this process is extremely familiar to the users in the industry. So when someone who has used a system for document management in logistics opens up our system, they're greeted with a fairly similar process as to what onboarding looked like when they were going through an onboarding process in their company. So yeah, you register, you connect a wallet, and essentially you're already in it. When you look into generation of the documents, you're looking at templates that one-to-one, they replicate bills of lading that if you are a person who is working in the industry and is working with these documents, which is an assumption that we take, right? You've seen bills of lading. You already come in touch with the information that is there. So all the fields are familiar, and essentially the visual output is also extremely familiar. I suppose the more difficult part of the onboarding, right, is always how do you bring people from an industry that might not be as tech savvy as, you know, Web3 is even now. It's very, how would you say, it's very new, right? And it can be a little bit frightening to people. And I think it's kind of stepping over that boundary and saying, look, guys, actually, there's nothing really scary here, and we help you understand how it works. Then it's a very smooth process. I think it's as long as the users themselves are familiar with logistics side of things and also are open-minded and kind of like accepting of the Web3 elements, the onboarding goes rather smoothly. The question then is, of course, you know, what if you have a user, you know, someone who is, for example, a bit older, someone who is not as familiar with Web3, et cetera, then it might take a bit more time. But in general, our philosophy is to emulate the process that the user is already familiar with.
Okay, perfect. So there's usually a lot of documents that are kept and left behind after the fact too. Like, how do you onboard those as well? Because the point would be to initially or eventually have a user not have those paper documents. So how does like eTEU onboard into the Web3 environment?
So our idea is to, help companies move away from paper entirely. And I think in terms of, you know, this is happening on multiple fronts. We are doing it as a company, helping other companies, but we're being also pushed by international institutions. So whether it's EU looking to essentially move to digital trade documents, it's the same with, you know, Singapore. All the other major kind of players in the logistics world are kind of moving towards that. Our idea is to essentially accommodate the document, or accommodate the user in terms of documents that are necessary. So for example, if we are missing a document, let's say we are onboarding you and you come to me and you say, look, Chris, this is very good, but I am missing a certificate of origin, for example. So the way it would work is I would say, okay, no problems at all. You would just send me a template. So essentially an empty document that I can use as a reference. And then we reconstruct it in our system. And essentially then you're able to, move your entire process to eTEU. The long-term vision of it is to essentially, through API connections and such, is to automate the process to go as far as to say, if it doesn't matter if you've done it in your system, but you just want to use the Web3, ownership transfer capabilities of eTEU, or you want to use documents generated in eTEU for customs, for your own software, for archive, for whatever, you can use that. One of the ways on how to do it is structured data. It's very simple, actually, yeah.
So where are the documents actually stored? Like, they're not stored in the eTEU software itself, is it? Or is it stored somewhere else on chain?
So the documents themselves are stored on the server, right? So it's all encrypted. We're following the latest, cybersecurity standards in terms of encryption, in terms of key access, management of users in general. What we aim to do is essentially it's the access to the documents and the transactions that are being stored on chain, right? So it's to make sure that there's an immutable audit trail, so you know exactly who sent it, who generated it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And when I say who, right, there's a lot of assumption even now, I think, in the industry, is when we say, it's a public ledger, that the companies kind of assume that everyone will be able to see the data, but that's not true, right? We're just essentially, what you are able to see on chain is the transaction history to a certain extent.
It does. Thank you so much, man. This has been such a blessing to have you guys here and chat with you, learn about the company and learn about yourselves as well. I don't have any other questions, but I would definitely love to do this again. You guys are you're easy to talk to. It's such a relaxed environment. I'm thankful for the opportunity to been able to be here with you both and chat with you guys.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for inviting.
No problem, man. And again, I appreciate that Spider-Man outfits. Edward, I was hoping you'd have something as well.
We'll get him for next time.
Next time.
I think just to close it off, and this is a flex that I'm going to use very arrogantly, is that a lot of people in this industry are quite a bit older than us. We always kind of push and promote ourselves as the young professionals, because all of our team is below the age of 30, and yet we're here, we're going through these legal processes, we're talking to the very professional people on the same level in terms of knowledge as they are. And I don't want to sound arrogant, but it's always a point of pride, I suppose, to position ourselves as, yes, we don't have 20 years of experience in the industry, but within 5 years we've managed to achieve something that a lot of people, for a lot of people, takes a lot of time.
I wouldn't call that being prideful or arrogant. I call that confident and knowing what you've achieved. I mean, if you can stand where you are, take a look back and see, I see the steps and how long it's taken for me to get here. Man, there's nothing wrong with having a cake and eating that and enjoying and celebrating what you've accomplished. Edward, did you have any closing words as well? And I guess how people can find you guys as well would be good.
I think in terms of finding us, we're always looking to connect with people kind of interested in what we do. So you can find us on X, you can find us on LinkedIn, or just on our website, which is eteu.co.uk, and on X we're eTEU.
eTEU Tech.
eTEU Tech, yeah. So yeah, please go follow, please reach out to us if you're interested. More than happy to chat. And I would say, as a kind of closing remark, our aim is to pretty much bridge this traditional old school industry with Web3 and kind of the world of Web3 technology. As we mentioned, we think the kind of potential for what we're doing is far beyond just replacing documentation. It's actually opening this new multi-trillion-dollar asset class of goods in transit, and creating both this investment opportunity for crypto investors to invest in those real-world assets being sailed on the water and earn yield on this, and for those companies involved in the international trade to solve the problems which our traditional financial institutions, traditional banks haven't been able to solve for them. So we look at ourselves as, in a way, a bridge between the traditional trade finance and the international trade market and the Web3 world. And I just want to say thank you to you for this conversation and for helping us to go on this mission and spreading the word about what we're working on. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you so much. If you guys don't mind holding back just after we finish this here, but to all my listeners out there, I want to thank you guys for listening. And throughout this conversation, I hope you found something valuable. I'll catch you guys on the next one.
We making moves. We making major moves. We making moves.